Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. We are joining you from Sarawak. We are at Riverside Majestic Hotel in Kuching. And our guest today comes from Undi Sarawak, which is a youth group that aims to provide awareness and literacy about democratic rights, particularly among young people. Ivan Alexander Ong is the public relations officer. He's also a student. Welcome to the show. It's good of you to join us, Ivan.
Thank you for having me.
I kind of want to begin with this news that I read. You were one of 3 people that had filed an application for a judicial review against the Registrar of Electors for Sarawak and the Election Commission, if I'm not mistaken. And then you had said that you felt like you were denied the right to vote in this upcoming weekend's elections. But the most recent news was that the High Court had dismissed that judicial review or that leave application and had ruled that the automatic right to vote does not mean a spontaneous right to vote or instantaneous right to vote. And I'm just wondering, were you very disappointed with the ruling that came out?
I was definitely disappointed, but I still respect the ruling made by young Arif Alexander Seo. Because we were really hoping to vote by this coming state elections. Approximately around 135,000 youths were looking forward to vote in the upcoming Sarawak state elections. So it's depriving us of our constitutional right to vote. The fact is that it will be gazetted by... It's already been gazetted. It will be coming into effect on the 15th. So our lawsuit was to delay the election up till the 2nd of January, which is still within the 60 days of the DUN dissolving, to give time to the Election Commission to prepare and do checking before allowing the youth to vote. However, we failed to have that lawsuit granted, and yeah, we're quite disappointed. But I can firmly say that it's definitely not the last you've heard of us. Okay. You'll hear our voices the loudest in the general elections next year.
Okay. Right. Okay. So Ivan, it's interesting. You're a law student, and I think your respect for the system, as it were, is laudable, right? You made the application, you failed. You go on with life and you plan for the next stage. But I do want to ask you, if you put on your kind of political hat, do you feel that the timing of the election was in part about not wanting this next generation to participate, that it was calculated to exclude you?
That's a very good question. Putting on my political hat, I would say that it is no coincidence that on the day that we won the lawsuit, the day that the High Court ordered the government to implement Undi 18 as soon as possible, is the day that the Chief Minister actually requested the Yang di-Pertuan Agong to lift the emergency that we had, the local emergency. So it's not coincidence. It's quite clear to see that they are trying to deprive us of our constitutional right to vote. Not to say that they're scared of us, but it's a big risk to take as well for them to let the youth vote, because it's an extravagant number of people that can sway an election.
Right,
just
and
like
you're
that.
an unknown. I mean, a political unknown, right? I mean, as an entity, you don't know where young people sway, right, or where they will go and place their votes.
Well, maybe we can follow up on that. Whether, for the young people who are able to vote in these elections, I'm just wondering whether, what the sentiment is, whether they're enthusiastic about the options available to them in the current political parties, what they might be looking for from political leaders in this election. I'm hearing a lot about political fatigue, even from young people who are battling with a whole host of issues that, even though they have the right to vote, say above 21 and 21 and above, that they may not be politically enthusiastic. There's a certain apathy about wanting to vote. Do you think so?
After what happened last year, definitely more people got grew more tired of politics, creeping out with politics and voting, and a lot of more people starting to say that their vote doesn't matter, because in the end it's still going to remain the same. About Undi 18, about the youth voters, there's a common misconception that youth voters would sway more towards opposition. That's not what I believe, even though that's the sentiment that the government is using against the opposition. But the reason, I mean, it's obviously the right thing to do, to let young people vote. It's not that the opposition believe that they could sway the youth voters towards them. So I think that it's unpredictable. Politics is very unpredictable.
I want to ask you this, though. You know, there are some practical problems for participation in the state or the territory of Sarawak, just because of its sheer size. If you're a rural youth working in one of the major cities of Sarawak, the cost of going back and participating is high. If you are a youth study here in Kuching, I understand you do law school here, but there might be people in the peninsula, the universities there, to fly back just to vote. Do you think the Election Commission has done anything imaginative to resolve the problem of participation and make it as inclusive as possible, considering the realities of distance and cost for participating?
I do agree with the cost, especially in recent days, with still being under MCO. Flights have been not cheap. I'm sure you experienced that coming here as well.
Yeah, thankfully somebody else paid.
But the EC could do something, because right now we have postal voting, but postal voting is only for those that are not in the country. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see any reason that postal voting could be done within the country.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. And about the cost of traveling here and there, I think our MP from Badar Kuching, Dr. Kelvin Yee, did bring it up in Parliament to the Transport Minister, YB Wikasyong, and to basically just lower the price of traveling back here to specifically for this election, so there'll be more turnouts. Because it's obviously a waste that you can't vote, you can't come back and vote because of that barrier, of that financial barrier. Yeah, so I do think that that's something needed to be done right there.
Do you think there's awareness about postal voting, say for the Sarawakians studying abroad? Are they aware about the efforts to register as a postal voter? I know that Undi Sarawak does a lot of kind of education work and outreach work, right? So working with students is to inform them of their democratic right to vote. I'm just wondering whether, while you're a student, you may be focused on other things, but if you are abroad, Sarawakian students abroad, whether they still want to participate, want to vote, or aware that they have democratic rights that they can register as postal voters.
I don't think that they're aware. Because I do have friends that are studying abroad, and all of them are not politically aware of what's happening in the country, or let alone our state. So it's very important that our efforts really reach out to them, that we need to up that gear of reaching out to youth abroad, to students abroad.
I would want to ask you though, okay, if you could list the issues that are important to young people, whether they're here in the state or they are abroad, whether they are across the South China Sea in the peninsula or in Sabah or further afield. Because a lot, what we hear is Sarawak is very ambitious. Yeah. It's got a lot of plans, and levels of industrialization, this, that, and the other. It will need young people to drive that vision. But are young people being consulted, and is there a gap between that vision and the realities of most Sarawakian youth? today? I mean, what do you see as the most important issues?
I believe that urban youths are more aware of the issues that's been going on around them. Rising sentiments such as MA63, digital infrastructure.
Or the lack of?
The lack of, definitely. NCR issues, education, healthcare, and those kind of stuff. From a study that we did, if I'm not mistaken, we found a rising increase in number of urban youths, specifically urban youths, because if one thing is also digital, like I mentioned before, digital infrastructure. Because if you have that, if you are exposed to that, it's easier for you to because everything's on Google now, everything is on Facebook now, so any issues that pop up from there, it just stuck with you. It just stick with you. But speaking about the rural youths, that's why it's the job of the government that is to spread digital literacy, right? We've been talking about 5G, 6G, 7G for the past few months, for the past few years, and even sometimes in Kuching, in my house, I don't get 4G. Yeah, so I think that our state government, whoever it is, should really up that gear in providing internet connection, because it's basic, it's essential for everyone, especially in this era.
That digital gap is real. Ivan, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Appreciate your time. Ivan Alexander Ongda from Undi Sarawak. We're going to take a quick break and come back and speak to another member of Undi Sarawak. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to Consider This. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm Melissa Idris, with me, Shirai Kuttan. We are joining you from Kuching. We are at Riverside Majestic Hotel, and our guest today is Adila Zaki. She's a law student and a public relations officer from Undi Sarawak. Let's continue our conversation about the aspirations and priorities of youth in Sarawak, particularly ahead of the weekend elections, which, won't be able, so the Undi 18 won't kick in during this election as yet. I want to pick up on a comment that was made by your colleague Ivan on before the break. He talked a bit about the differences between urban and rural youth and the priorities and the challenges. And I wanted to ask you about the realities of a rural youth, what the challenges are, and perhaps what you understand to be the differences between, say, middle class, urban, politically motivated youth based in Kuching, for instance, versus a youth in a rural area.
All right. So first of all, thank you so much for that question. Could talk a bit slow right now. I guess when it comes to, because I'm speaking from a youth who's been in urban. I'm not exactly from any rural community particularly. I do have friends, however. But I do realize that the priorities are different, particularly because of the digital infrastructure and the access to information as well. For me as an urban youth, everything is between my fingers. Gadgets are everywhere. It's easy for me to get internet connectivity to further research about things that I want to know. And this may not be something that rural youths have, you see, because they don't have the internet connection, for instance, or they are excluded from all of this. So the priorities might be different because they are exposed to different things. Their thinking is different as well. Maybe they're more focused on how do I get day by day? How do I survive? Maybe urban youths are looking at it as well, but they're looking at it from a different angle, for instance, systemically.
I want to ask you about that, because what's very interesting is the way in which people think about government and the role of government in their lives. And the more marginal you are, the more precarious your life is, the more dependent you might be on government, right? You need some basic infrastructure, and that fuels patronage politics. It's something that's not just here in Sarawak, but it's all over Malaysia, right? And money politics is also driven by some of that dynamics. Are urban youth, someone like yourself, much more independent of this because you have resources, because you have, as you say, information? Is that changing for rural youth? Are they beginning to feel less dependent on government?
Referring to urban youth as much as myself.
Yeah.
I think that when it comes to urban youth, it's a bit easier to find a way to be more independent. But that doesn't mean that we're totally not independent. Doesn't mean that we don't need the help from the government, because there are certain parts that we particularly still need help. So yeah.
Is that so? Do you take on some, looking at the younger generation and say political allegiances? Again, the youth bloc is not monolithic; it's multifaceted, but also because the understanding is perhaps youth are digital natives, that they may differ from their parents in terms of political allegiances or political thinking. Is that true? Is there a generational difference, do you think?
To me, I think it really depends, because I understand that there are people in here who have families who are very strong in their political beliefs, and it just continues on. However, I feel like when it comes to now, youths are a bit more braver in order to have a contrary opinion, and I feel like I can see that even in my own family as well. I wasn't taught about politics, you see. I didn't talk about politics because my parents never did. But I started off, and I do have contrary opinions with my own father, which becomes a debate over dinner sometimes, but that's fine. And that shows it,
Are your parents supportive of your involvement in Undi Sarawak? Do they think this is a good thing, or do they worry for you, as many parents do, perhaps unnecessarily?
Parents will always worry, regardless. I mean, even today, they're probably a little bit worried, but then it's fine. I gave them assurance, and I need them to know that at this age, me as a youth, what I say matters, and they need to trust me enough to voice out what I think.
Are political parties listening to organizations like Undi Sarawak, like Undi 18? I'm just wondering because, I see particularly in Melaka, maybe Melaka elections, Sarawak elections, there seems to be a bit of a concerted effort to field younger candidates. But that's not good enough, right? Engagement with youth has to come from a more deeper, more substantial effort. What would you like to see political parties do to truly, to have kind of substantial engagement with youth?
Engage with us. What's the problem with it? And then if I, an urban youth, don't see that, what more about those who are in the rural communities? They are more, detached. What is being done? Okay, even me, dekat sini, in the city, that should be easy accessible enough. In Kuching some more, I don't see anything particularly. I don't feel like I'm being engaged. I don't feel like I'm being heard. What more to those who are not here, who are a bit more farther away?
Right. I mean, one of the things we do notice about, Malaysian politics in general, maybe also quite pronounced in Sarawak, is that when you do have a young candidate, they're often the child of a politician.
Yeah.
That they continue a political dynasty. Do you think that Sarawak politics will change in the near future? Are you thinking 2, 3, 4 electoral cycles before you see a real substantial change in the way democracy is practiced in the territory?
It will take a while. For me, at this rate, it will take a while, definitely.
Why?
Because I feel there is not enough avenue to make sure those people who don't come from these political families to venture into it, especially when it comes to women, I feel. There needs to be facilitation, you see. We need to change the ideas of this politics as intimidating. Because I feel like a lot of us, maybe we feel like we do want to venture into it, but we feel like we don't know enough. Okay. And because everyone around you is saying like, why don't you know enough? You know what? Instead of looking at it as like, okay, you don't know enough, look at it as something as a start. And nurture it, enhance it, deepen it. But I feel like that's not enough of that.
There was a comment that was made by a political analyst. I'm not going to say who, but many months ago, he was observing the political participation or the political engagement of youth. And I think he made a comparison that youth in Sabah were far more engaged or aware of some of the political issues or the political leaders and the decisions they made. But they said in Sarawak, not so much, because perhaps not that there wasn't an interest, but rather lack of support. So similar to what you're saying, that youth are not supported in their interest for democratic rights or for political decisions and good governance. And I'm just wondering, in your role as Undi Sarawak, whether you see that reflected amongst your peers, your cohorts, and what you're doing to perhaps change that narrative.
Understood. I mean, it really depends on the initiatives that we have. Okay, for instance, for these state elections, we have something called Prati Sarawak, where youth can come over, or anyone particularly can become observers for state election offences. So this is one way where you can feel like you're getting involved, even though you might not be here, for instance, but you are monitoring it online. You're being part of the process to ensure a free and fair election, you see. And besides that, we've also done matters, or we created spaces where youth of Sarawak can share their voices, can share their opinions without feeling like, okay, I'll be judged because I have this particular opinion. And we embrace the differences of opinion, So I think
what about media? What is the media's role in disseminating the views of young people, or amplifying the views? Is mainstream working, or has it failed you? Has I say that with a amount of guilt on my end. But what about social media? Is that become the main avenue for the creation of conversations among young people?
I would agree. Yes, social media is very important, especially when it comes to Instagram, this and that. Young people, I mean, those who are still in school, for instance, they already have social media. That's how my sister, because she's a child and she has social media, that's how she stays informed. And I dare say that my conversations with her are rather interesting because she knows all of this, because she is involved in social media. I'm not saying that mainstream media is not helping, of course. I mean, like, you're on social media as well. So it works both ways.
I'm wondering about the awareness of youth in Sarawak about federal level politics. I mean, there's already, sometimes it's quite parochial. You need to understand what's happening at the local level, but do they see, are they aware or paying attention to what's happening at a federal level, whether they see strong representation of the territory of Sarawak at the federal level as important to improving their future?
I believe that they do, but at the same time, there's this narrative or idea that federal is federal, Sarawak local politics is Sarawak local politics. They see it as separate. They see federal as something that is not related to them at times. For instance, macam federal is just Peninsula Malaysia, orang Malaya, but that's the problem. It's not just that. Federal level affects everybody. Federal level affects us as well. And I think that is something that's still around, and not just for youth, but just Sarawakians in general.
Are young people being swept up by this talk of a separate Sarawak, or Sarawak for Sarawakians, or independence? I mean, all this was coming up in this election. Are young people caught up in that, or are they skeptical?
I would say we're skeptical, to be honest, looking at how it will go. But it's interesting to follow.
Why are they skeptical? Can you elaborate a little bit? So what's driving the skepticism? What's the main sentiment around the discussion about an independent Sarawak?
So when it comes to an independent Sarawak, the reason why everyone's pushing for it is because they're saying Sarawakian rights are not being observed, especially when we refer back to MA 63. But that's the thing, if you do have representation at the federal level, strong representation, effective representation, all of these rights will be observed nevertheless. That is the crux of it. You don't need an independent Sarawak. You just need strong representation at the place where it's supposed to be.
Right, okay. Adila Zaki, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adila Zaki there from Undi Sarawak, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.